In the history of aviation, there have been only a few aircraft that truly changed the world, but only two of them became real giants of the sky. The first appeared in 1969 and forever changed international travel. It was called the Queen of the Skies. The second appeared almost 40 years later and became the largest passenger aircraft ever built, Boeing 747 and Airbus A380. But here is the question. If both were so revolutionary, why did one become a legend, while the other became a symbol of an unrealized future? To understand that, we need to go back to the moment when the era of giants began. In the late 1960s, aviation was standing on the edge of a major transformation. Intercontinental flights already existed, but they were still a luxury. Aircraft were relatively small, and tickets across the ocean were so expensive that for most people, flying remained a dream. Then Boeing decided to do something that seemed almost impossible: to build a passenger aircraft twice as large as any other. That's how the Boeing 747 was born. When the aircraft first took to the skies in 1969, it looked almost unreal. Its enormous fuselage, the distinctive hump at the front, and four powerful engines made it unlike any other aircraft. But the story wasn't just about size. The 747 could carry more than 400 passengers across intercontinental distances. For airlines, that meant one simple thing: much cheaper tickets per passenger. And that changed everything. Over the following decades, millions of people were able to fly across the ocean for the first time. Tourism began to grow rapidly. International travel became common, and the world's major airports started filling with new routes. It's no surprise that the aircraft quickly earned its legendary nickname, the Queen of the Skies. For decades, the 747 became the symbol of global aviation. But many years later, another aircraft appeared that was supposed to surpass it in every way: bigger, more modern, and far more ambitious. And that was the moment when the European manufacturer decided to challenge the legend. In the late 1990s, the aviation industry once again faced a major question. Passenger numbers were growing rapidly. Major airports, such as Heathrow, Frankfurt, and Tokyo, were beginning to operate at the limits of their capacity. Airlines faced a dilemma. How do you transport more people if there is almost no space to build new runways? The European manufacturer Airbus believed the answer was obvious. Not more flights, bigger airplanes. That's how the Airbus A380 project was born. And it wasn't just another aircraft. It was an engineering statement about the future of aviation. Airbus believed in a concept known as hub and spoke. The idea was simple. Passengers from cities around the world would fly into large global hubs, such as London, Dubai, or Singapore. And from there, giant aircraft would carry hundreds of passengers between continents. If this model worked, a massive airplane would become the perfect solution. That's why the A380 was built without compromises. Unlike most passenger aircraft, it received two full passenger decks. Not a small upper deck like on the Boeing 747, but a full second level running along the entire length of the fuselage. The result was astonishing. The A380 could carry more than 500 passengers in a typical configuration, up to 850 passengers in the highest density layout. That's more than any passenger aircraft in history. Its wingspan reached almost 80 meters. Its maximum takeoff weight exceeded 560 tons. When the A380 was first presented to the public in 2005, it looked like the beginning of a new era. Many experts at the time said, the future of aviation belongs to giant aircraft. And for a while, it seemed like they were right. When the A380 began regular flights, passengers were amazed. The aircraft offered a level of comfort that had previously been almost impossible. On board some airlines, there were even shower spas, bars, lounge areas. Especially famous were the aircraft of Emirates. Their A380s essentially became flying hotels. And from a passenger experience perspective, the A380 was often considered the best aircraft in the world. It was quieter, smoother in flight, and much more spacious than most other airliners. But in this entire story, there was one problem, and it had nothing to do with technology. The problem was that the world began changing faster than the engineers expected. While Airbus was developing the A380, a process that took almost 10 years, airline strategies were slowly starting to change. Instead of transporting thousands of people through a few giant hubs, airlines began opening direct flights between smaller cities. Passengers increasingly wanted to fly non-stop, and that's where the problem appeared. For the A380 to be profitable, it had to be filled almost completely. That meant hundreds of passengers on every flight. Not every route in the world could generate that kind of demand. At the same time, a new generation of aircraft appeared: Boeing 787 Dreamliner and Airbus A350. They were significantly smaller, but they had one key advantage: efficiency. New engines, composite materials, and modern aerodynamics allowed these aircraft to fly very long distances, but with fewer passengers. For airlines, that meant less risk. Instead of operating one giant aircraft carrying 500 people, airlines could launch 2 flights using smaller aircraft. And gradually, this model began to dominate. It was at that moment that it became clear the A380 had run into a problem that was almost impossible to solve. It was simply too big for the new world of aviation. Orders began to decline. Some airlines cancelled their plans. Others chose to invest in more flexible aircraft. In 2021, Airbus made a difficult decision. The production of the Airbus A380 was officially ended. In total, 251 aircraft were built, far fewer than originally expected. And this is where the story of the two giants becomes even more interesting, because the aircraft that appeared decades earlier ultimately lived much longer. When people compare the Boeing 747 and the Airbus A380, many make the same mistake. They only look at size. But in aviation, size is not the most important factor. The most important factor is flexibility. And this is where the story of these two aircraft begins to diverge sharply. When Boeing created the 747 in the 1960s, engineers assumed that the future of passenger travel might belong to supersonic aircraft, such as Concorde. Because of this, the 747 was originally designed so that it could easily be converted into a cargo aircraft in the future. That's why the cockpit was placed on top of the famous hump. This design allowed the nose of the aircraft to open, making it possible to load large cargo directly through the front. And that feature turned out to be a brilliant decision. Over time, when many passenger 747s were retired, they received a second life. They were converted into freighter aircraft. And today, cargo versions of the 747 remain some of the most important aircraft in global logistics. They transport everything, from car engines to satellites. The A380 never really had that option. Its double-deck design was excellent for passengers, but extremely difficult for cargo operations. Turning an A380 into an efficient cargo aircraft is practically impossible, and that meant that when demand for passenger flights declines, the aircraft has no second life scenario, and that's only one of the reasons. Another problem was infrastructure. To accommodate the A380, airports had to upgrade. Gates, taxiways, jet bridges, aircraft stands. Not every airport was willing to invest millions of dollars for a single aircraft type. The Boeing 747, on the other hand, was far more versatile. It could be used on different routes, in different configurations, and even decades after its passenger career ended. That's why the story of these two aircraft is not just a story about technology. It's a story about two different visions of the future of aviation. One aircraft tried to make flying even bigger. The other simply turned out to be more adaptable to a changing world. And in aviation, sometimes the one that survives is not the biggest, but the one that can adapt. Today, both of these aircraft are gradually disappearing from the passenger skies. The last passenger flights of the Boeing 747 have already become part of history, and the production of the Airbus A380 officially ended in 2021. But their legacies are very different. The 747 lived for more than half a century. More than 1,500 aircraft were built. It became not only a passenger airliner, but also a cargo giant, a government aircraft, and even a platform for space programs. It was this aircraft that effectively opened the era of mass intercontinental travel. The A380 had a different role. It became the ultimate example of how far passenger aircraft engineering could go. The biggest, the most spacious, and for many passengers, the most comfortable aircraft they had ever flown on. But the history of aviation is not always decided by technology alone. Sometimes it is decided by timing. And when you look at these two giants together, one thing becomes clear. The Airbus A380 was the largest passenger aircraft in history. But the Boeing 747 was the aircraft that changed the world. And that's why even today, when the last jumbos are slowly leaving the skies, for many people around the world, there is still only one true queen of the skies.